where I want to start is where we ended on Sunday, and that is the continued threat of war between Israel and Iran, possibly. And here, I think we need to really look back. It's a week now since the assassination of Hania in Tehran. My understanding is the US is sending lots of messages to various Iranian government officials saying, please don't extend this war to the region. On the other hand, we have the Russian security minister who's gone to Tehran, who is, according to the Western press, is selling defense equipment so that when Israel attacks, there is no problem. Sorry, I can hear an echo myself. So, in these circumstances, I think what we have to look at is, first of all, the international approach to this. Now, imagine Iran had killed anybody, a Mexican, not an Israeli, in Brazil or somewhere. I mean, there would have been no end to condemnation of this. And here we have this situation, which was a deliberate act. Moshe is absolutely right. This was a long plan, a deliberate act to extend the war to the region. He wrote about it in 2012. As he said yesterday, he's right to repeat it now. And yet, everyone is telling Iran to show restraint. Now, as someone who absolutely wants the downfall of the Islamic Republic, I find the whole situation bizarre, to be honest. And it's even more bizarre that I read yesterday, two left-wing Iranian groups, Kargar and CPI, Communist Party of Iran, which had the split, which was the Hekmatists, have issued a joint leaflet saying we condemn state terrorism by Iran and Israel, wanting to start a reactionary war. I mean, I think some of the Iranian opposition on the right are in a parallel universe to me, but clearly a very large section of the Iranian left, some of whom we considered as left, they're not Tudeh, they're not majority, people we considered left must live in a parallel universe to where I am anyway. Hamid Dabashi, who is a professor of Iranian studies in Columbia, wrote a reasonably good piece, I think, a couple of weeks ago, in which he says that the continued genocide in Gaza and in the rest of Palestine has far-reaching implications for the world. I think that's an exaggeration because the world is too big, but I think there is definitely some truth in saying this has unprecedented implications for the Middle East. For the Middle East, it's never going to be the same. It's going to be one of those significant times, 48, 67, 2023. I don't think it's going to be the same. And this will affect, in many ways, the politics domestically and internationally in those countries. So we will have to look at this in a very different ways than repeating the slogans we've remembered from 1981 or 82. It's a reactionary war between Iran and Iraq, and therefore we just take the same position. We talked on Sunday extensively about the Arab states and their population's reaction to the war, but also the government's reactions. Iran is in a very difficult position, a very strange position in some ways. First of all, for decades, it has given all these slogans about sorry, we have a problem here. as Zoom camera is. I can't do it. Yeah. No, I can't open the whole thing. Okay, we'll try it like that. Okay. What we can say is, on the one hand, it had given for decades all these slogans about defending Palestine, fighting the Zionist entity, and so on. And in a way, it has done very little, as most of you know, since October 2023. It's understandable in some ways. They want to survive. They don't want to they don't want Gaza to happen in Tehran. So that's, in some ways, you can see what's happening there. But on the other hand, they are under quite a lot of pressure from their allies. And there is benefit in being the head of the axis of resistance. There is popularity. So on the one hand, they're hated inside Iran for whatever positions they say, irrespective of whether they support Israel or if they don't support Israel. And on the other hand, they feel they have to do some responsibility. So the response, I think people have used the word calibrated. I've used it as a calibrated response. It has been a very calculated and calibrated response. Survival of the Islamic Republic being top of the agenda, but at the same time, skirmishes into allowing or encouraging Hezbollah for skirmishes in Lebanon, the support for the Houthis, and when they were attacked, when they had the situation where the embassy, the consulate adjacent to the embassy in Damascus was hit, they responded. The response wasn't what they hoped. They didn't do very well, but that was what they considered to be a limited response. There hasn't been many, until last Wednesday, as I said before, there hasn't been many major protests in Iran. And again, I would put the blame on this in support of Palestinians and Gaza. And I put the blame on this solely on the Iranian government. One, because its rhetoric has tired people of this, and they don't believe the Islamic Republic. So when they hear the rhetoric, they think maybe it's just another. They don't apparently believe that there is genocide going on in Gaza, because the Islamic Republic shows this, and the pro-Israeli TV stations that they usually watch shows them something else. Life is normal, apparently, in most of the occupied territories. And this has implications in that there hasn't been spontaneous demonstrations. The left, who does support Palestine, is obviously under suppression, so they can't organize demonstrations either. So we really have a very strange situation. On the other hand, being the head of the axis of resistance has had benefits. You can't deny the fact that outside Iran, the image of the country has improved in Sunni Arab countries, but also in Africa, in what people call the global south. Here is the victim, Iran, trying to do whatever it can. And so there is some sympathy for the Iran. We saw all these contradictions during the election of the Iranian president. On the one hand, we had a situation where all the 6 candidates were using very flowery language to show how they were determined to support the Palestinians. And yet, all of them were promising closer relations with the West, with one exception, and he was obviously out of touch with the general line that was coming from the Supreme Leader's office. They were all saying, oh, we need to stop the sanctions, so we need to restart relations with US. So that was the message that was coming. And it is this problem of increased dissatisfaction in the country on the one hand because of sanctions, because of repression, because of the interference of the state in the private lives of individuals. But on the other hand, the fact that this is the countries that claimed it would support Palestine come what may. And here, of course, we can and we should make fun of Iran's presidential election. It usually doesn't mean much. The elected president won't have much power. But having said that, it is no worse than many of the other countries that the West promotes as democracies. It's not a good situation, but in the neighboring countries, there aren't even that level of, for example, no one stands against Ben Salman or King Saud, and they're supposed to be okay, apparently. In the consideration of the opposition inside the country, I don't want to go too much in detail. We've spoken about it before. But what has hit people worse than ever before is the gap between the rich and the poor. Iran has one of the highest Gini factors in the world, apparently, 40%, 40.9% in 2019. It went slightly down in 2022, but to 38.9, but that wasn't well. Okay. And of course, only a few months before October 2023, we still were hearing a lot about the women life freedom movement. Now, I know that there are Palestinian anti-Zionist comrades who tell me this was all a fiction. It was the West that stirred it up and so on. I'm not of that opinion. I strongly disagree with that view. There is genuine dissatisfaction with the interference of state in the private lives of women and the youth, and they rebel. And the fact that various right-wingers, from the son of the ex-Shah to Benjamin Netanyahu to Tommy Robinson, were amongst the supporters of women life freedom, it doesn't change the fact that it was a genuine movement. Obviously, when you have a situation like that, Western powers try and find the path to regime change, a slight show of hope for them that these protests are going to achieve regime change. They've tried so many different versions of this, it hasn't happened. So it was inevitable. But that doesn't change at all the fact that that movement never went beyond the slogans of its initial start. It never became a class struggle. It never involved the protests of tens of thousands of workers who are opposed to privatization, contract work, and so on. But it did mobilize the youth, and it did mobilize students, so we shouldn't underestimate it. And here I want to talk a little bit about the right-wing opposition to the Islamic Republic, because the title says Iran and its opposition. So I'm going to talk a little bit about them. They are in the news. The Daily Telegraph, as early as last week, told us that Tommy Robinson is a fan of Reza Pahlavi, and as many of us have witnessed when we are in Palestine demonstrations, the Iranian royalists arrive with Israel's flag, and they are with the fascists. Now, in a way,
I claim responsibility. I said that and put it on the Telegraph website, the newspaper. That's right. I didn't write it.
Okay, anyway, glad to hear that it's
So at
it's
least you had
it's
Mark just
fact-checked.
looking over it.
It was fact-checked, that's why.
Making the bullshit vaguely plausible.
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, they do support you. So, and in many ways, the expat royalists and Reza Pahlavi have a lot in common with Tommy Robinson, because like Tommy Robinson, Reza Shah, who was the grandfather of Reza Pahlavi, was actually a fascist. He supported Hitler. He was sent into exile because of his views and his closeness to Germany. And I know that royalists now say, oh no, it was a bit, between Britain and Germany, he thought Germany might help Iran's construction, but that's bullshit. I mean, there's so many articles about Ariana and Iran, and even the change of the name to Iran was part of that rapprochement. But like Tommy Robinson, now our Crown Prince visits Tel Aviv. He was welcomed. There are lots of pictures of him with Netanyahu. He's welcomed there. In fact, Israel has invested so much money in Iranian opposition. I'm not sure what else is left to spend. So they have a satellite 24/7 television station that broadcasts from London. Is pretty rubbish, but it has a large audience. And this is the television that tells people nothing is happening. They are exaggerating. There are wars in Gaza. The Hamas, terrorist Hamas, as they say. I don't know why the Israelis call it Hamas. But the terrorist Hamas is being punished, but obviously there are some civilian casualties, but it's nothing going on. So there we have the Reza Pahlavi. He actually went and touched the stone in Jerusalem, is it, where dignitaries are taken. Anyway, there were lots of photos. And this isn't, again, a coincidence. He also attended the conservative right, National Conservative Conference in US in July, mid-July, he was there. And it's no coincidence because in a way, the foundations that have supported not just Reza Pahlavi, but all the candidates for regime change from above in Iran, and who have been active not just after the Women Life Freedom movement, but have been active for at least 2 decades, at least 15 years. They are associated with money that comes from Zionist groups, not just AIPAC, but hardline Zionist groups, and neoconservative Republicans. And this has been, if you like, quite an effective way of influencing opinion inside Iran in favor of the royalists, as opposed to anything intelligent coming out of it. And the hope of these groups has always been that somehow, if we can form an alliance around this crown prince, and if there is demonstrations, turbulence in Iran, he can be, I don't know, parachuted in, helicoptered in, whatever, but he would arrive in Iran. There are a number of problems with this promise, with this situation. The first one is that this government is unpopular, but it has a base. It still has a base, partly because it pays for some of this base, but some of this base, irrespective of how much corruption there is, incompetence there is, part of this base will remain with the regime and will fight for this regime because they know they will be killed by the regime change people and so on. But I think those who look at regime change a bit deeper will tell you that there are other reasons. For example, Most historic changes in Iran, with the exception of 1953, which was the coup d'etat by the US, have happened inside the country. We all, I mean, the left has suffered worse from the repression of the Islamic Republic, but we can't say the Islamic Republic was imposed on us from outside. It was a homegrown phenomena, and I will go to some details about it, but it didn't appear out of nowhere. It was an Iranian phenomena. And some people, including Dabashi, but also others, point out that over these 40 years, as much as people hate the government, they have managed to negotiate their demands within the framework of the government. For example, they have pushed the issue of women to the limits of what the Islamic Republic can accept. In terms of education, Iran has more women undergraduates than male graduates, students in the university. Even in terms of the headscarf, okay, I think it's absolute nonsense that in 21st century people tell a woman what to wear on her head. But the Iranian women have pushed that to the limit. If you see some of the headscarves people are wearing, you wouldn't consider them headscarves. As Al-Qaeda kept telling its supporters, these are not real Muslims. These Shias are really, have gone the wrong way. So there you are. But there are other reasons. And one of those is probably the fact that for US politicians, for European politicians, looking at the concept of regime change, they just see it as yet another Islamic revolution. And the fact that it has stayed 44 years in power, the fact that it has negotiated all these differences with various groups within the country and outside the country, tells us that it's not the same. It's a bit like Al-Qaeda is different from the Taliban. Houthis are different from Iran's Islamic Republic. Iran's Islamic revolution wasn't copied by others in the ways that the West imagines, that if you overthrow Iran's Islamic Republic, that's it, all these Islamic movements will disappear. Some of these Islamic movements, such as Al-Qaeda, or especially when it became Islamic State and Daesh, actually find Iran a worse enemy than the West. I mean, when they were fighting in Iraq or Syria, their message was clear. The main enemy is Iran, and then it's the West. The Shias are the main enemy. So it's not as simple and straightforward that you do a regime change in Tehran, all the Middle East problems will be resolved. There is another point, and people have commented on this, is the history. I'm never a fan of it, but this Persian nationalism that sees the connection to the history of the country and therefore is very resilient to any attempt to divide the regions into nationalities, national minorities. The mistakes of various national minority political groups, especially the Kurds, is another matter. But it's, I think if you ask the Kurds, many of them would tell you, we want a regional independence, but we are Iranian. Not all Kurds want to be in the larger Kurdish entities that some of them do believe they want. There is another narrative about Iran's Islamic revolution. And I will point out that I'm not 100% convinced by it, but we should consider it. And I've increasingly tried to think a bit harder because you have to rationalize to yourself why is it that this government has lasted so long and how did it come out? And this is a work by Mirza Passi. Mirza Passi is an academic at City University, New York. And he argues that in pre-revolutionary Iran, anti-modern and anti-Western discourse of authenticity and nativism, which did play a major part in the growth of nationalism and then the movement, were not originally Islamic. They were just anti-Western, they were nativist, and the influence on that was Heidegger. He has documents on this. He's not just making a theory out of the blue. And one of the things he says, his book is called Iran's Quiet Revolution. He argues that the Pahlavi state, while pursuing Western-style economic policies, promoted in parallel a kind of anti-Western cultural stance between the modern West and spiritual Iran. And there are elements of truth in that. There definitely were journals such as Bunyad Monthly, which was a monthly journal, promoted by the sister of the Shah. So it was the intellectual kind of paper, which promoted these nativist ideas. And one of the intellectuals who supported this was Ehsan Naraghi, an ex-Tudeh person. Now, obviously, and these people had their own Iran background. Ala Ahmad, who is now quite lots of articles are being written about him and so on, are examples of this. And this was, in my opinion, the Shah's response to the fact that he didn't want to, in 1953, he was the puppet of the West. He'd run away. They did a coup d'etat for him. After the coup d'etat, they put him on a plane and he was back in Iran. By the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, he wanted to make his own mark. He didn't want to be just another puppet that the West had put back on the throne. And in this, he did promote this Persian mysticism. There was a lot of, obviously, because of his own background, a lot of terrible references to Arianism and all the rest of it, which has stayed with his supporters of his son. But I think there were elements of this kind of anti-Westernism. Mirza Passi rightly points out that this backfired, obviously, because this ideology had some support, and I have read a lot of stuff that confirms this, amongst the members of ex-national fronts. So people who supported Mossadegh, who had been defeated, who no longer were in a position to take any power, were merging, coalescing around this type of anti-Western idea. But of course, once you have Shia Islam, which is both Iranian and Islamic, and you have the mosque, and you combine with this with the suppression of the left, then you are in a position to achieve what the mosque, the bazaar, and the clergy managed to do in February 17. Dabashi has other reasons why regime change is not going to happen. Or I would say, one should always say it's not going to be easy, because it might happen, you never know, but he says it's unlikely. And he talks of emergence of Iran after 19th century, 20th century colonialism with a new sense of national consciousness, not just the old Persian consciousness. And he claims this persisted throughout the Qajar dynasty, the Pahlavis, and now continues as well. I mean, there might be some truth. And he emphasizes the way the Islamic Republic manages contradictions by, if you like, creating and recreating itself. You must have heard during the Iran presidential election, people talk of reformists. Now, the reformist movement of the Islamic Republic is not a reform from below. It's the rulers decided to have a reform side, right? And as I've often said, this is its limitation because there's no base for it. Its base is still the Islamic Republic Party of 1980s, so it's still part of that. But the fact that it is tolerated and the fact that whenever there is a need for it, and this time, I think in 2024, there was a need to bring it back on the scene because of Gaza, because of the war. And I go back to what I said earlier, Gaza has changed the region. It has made the Iranian supreme leader very conscious of his problem and even more pragmatic than he was before. For the last few months, even before the election of Pezeshkian, we kept hearing that accepting peace or accepting international relations is not betrayal of Islam. So it's paving the way for U-turns, or at least half U-turns. But you can see that, and again, that fools the many. I mean, the number of people who did eventually take the reformist route in the election of a couple of weeks ago showed that it works. And in some ways, this capability to, if you like, create and recreate itself has the ability of lengthening the regime's life. For this, if you like, the promoters of life, women, freedom movement, which was, I'm sure you had heard it on the national news on various platforms. My own take on it was, I was getting very worried when I heard Sunak promoting it. Then Harry and Meghan were wearing a T-shirt with it. But the last straw was definitely Prince Albert of Monaco wearing a Women, Life, Freedom T-shirt. And that really did put me off. But that didn't put me off the movement. It's just the build-up of this. During that period, and during that, if you like, the eagerness of the West to promote this idea that changing government in Iran is going to be both possible and inevitable. It wasn't just Fox News that was promoting the Shah, ex-Shah's son. It wasn't just Trump who was supporting the ex-Shah's son. CNN was promoting him. BBC was promoting him. It became, if you like, part of the order of the day. There they are, dissatisfied people. There is this modern guy. He does look a bit like a mafia boss, I must admit. But so, you know, you could see this kind of very thin Ayatollah Khamenei next to this guy. And it would have been difficult to see which one was worse of a hero figure, but they did promote him. They were promote his surroundings and so on. And it became, if you like, it was no longer just the very right who were promoting this. Everyone was doing it. For all of these people and their surroundings who have finance, who have some capabilities, October 2023 was a shock because suddenly they were removed from the story of the Middle East. They were no longer part of this story, right? They were no longer the item to be brought in. The interviewee wasn't going to be Reza Pahlavi. And as the genocide went on, these people became more and more angry. And you can see this anger in the antis when we go to Palestine demonstrations. They are not just with Tommy Robinson's crowd because they hate Palestinians. They are there because their own agenda, what they thought was going to happen, regime change in Iran, is no longer the most important item on the agenda. And my understanding is that the Biden administration was never 100% convinced about this, and it never took it that seriously because from what we can gather, discussions with the Islamic Republic have had quite a long history over the last few months. But it's quite clear that after that, there were more the US also decided it didn't necessarily want or would get involved in regime change in Iran in the way that maybe people had hoped. The anger of this crowd, and it's not just royalists, it's a whole kind of range of right-wing Iranian opposition, mainly expat, but they have people. Their anger is not just about the poor Palestinians who are facing genocide. Their anger is also against UN officials. So until a few months earlier, the UN was God. They wrote to the UN, they were interested in UN's human rights group, and suddenly these people are now talking about Palestinians, what's going on? And that in itself became a problem. I have said quite a bit about the right-wing opposition. I think it's also worth talking about at least the exile opposition, left opposition. And here, I think it is probably right to say there are elements of Islamophobia that affect this opposition. And that's why they can't see, for example, that the war in Gaza is not between Hamas and Israel. The first leaflet that the two wonderful organizations I mentioned earlier issued said the war this was November 2023, it referred to the war between Hamas and Israel. This is not a war between Hamas and Israel. This is a war against the Palestinian people. If you can't read, if you can't see, if you can't understand, stay quiet. Don't issue statements like this. It's embarrassing, comrades. It really is embarrassing. And there you have it. So whether they like it or not, they have bought the Israeli propaganda that fighting Hamas is the same as fighting the Palestinians. That's it. So 180,000, according to Lancet, are dead or likely to die. And we are saying they were all Hamas. Well, I'm just completely out of my depths here. And I think this right-wing trend didn't happen overnight in the Iranian left. Part of it is the liberal influence in the global left. The global left, we talked about it earlier, is moving, has become soft. It's, I don't know if it's defensive position, it's the situation in the world, the backlash against the left, but in general, it has become liberal. For the Iranian left, some of it was financial. So there was both the general move to the right, but also financial. I think it was 2011, 2012, when we were arguing against the Iran tribunal. These right-wing groups in US, National Endowment for Democracy, Washington Middle East Institute, all these were financing a tribunal of the leaders of the Islamic Republic for the execution of left-wing political prisoners, although they wouldn't say they were left-wing, in 1987, massacre of political prisoners. So when the war between Iran and Iraq finished, Mujahideen took a military action because at that time they were allies of Saddam. They took a military action in the west of Iran. They were defeated, thrown back into Iraq. But Khomeini went mad about this. And what happened was that they executed a very large number, that we are talking of thousands, and can't be, there are so many different figures, I won't go into that, of Mujahideen supporters, but also left-wingers. And the left-wingers, by that stage, they had unfortunately killed already the radical left. Quite a lot of the people they killed were majority and Tudeh people, right? But there were also minority and other organizations, but the majority of 87 executions, quite a lot of them anyway, were of majority Fedayeen and Tudeh. And imagine you're asking right-wing Zionists, right-wing US Americans and Zionists to put a trial for the justice of the murder of left-wing political prisoners. You must be out of your skull to do that, out of your brain. And of course, very little happened. There was a lot of ceremonies. They did set up an expensive room. This was all propaganda, because for these kind of people, you don't need to take the leaders of the Islamic. They're probably making economic deals with the leaders of the Islamic Republic day and night. What they wanted was a showcase, and the showcase did appear. And they had the platform, and they brought various lawyers who condemned Iran and so on. It didn't even get to Persian-speaking news in a wide range, in a wide scale, as they had hoped. So it was a complete waste of, in my opinion, time and effort. Now, when you told these ex-comrades, you shouldn't take money for National Endowment for Democracy, you shouldn't associate yourself with these right-wing forces, there are a plethora of organizations that fund the Iranian opposition. In EU, there's a in the European Union, there are right-wing Dutch groups that pay for that. When we told these groups you shouldn't do it, they would tell you, but Lenin took the train, that Germany. What was, the end justifies the means, and so on. And in a way, I think if the Iranian left was deteriorating after Iran's tribunal, it deteriorated further, but it also paved the way for right-wing expat royalists' opinion to influence their views. So although they still have they do write, we support the Palestinian people, even though Iran and Israel are exactly at the same level in terms of crime. They have been influenced by the general mood going to the right. And there is also the fact that I talk to a lot of left-wingers inside Iran who are much better, thank God. They are not, I haven't seen any of them writing the kind of stupid leaflets I read from the left abroad. But they have become influenced by the whole notion of intersectionalism, safe spaces, politeness, and at times, I think I'm back in left unity, to be honest, when I'm speaking to some of these comrades. We shouldn't just talk about the working class. Women and working class are put on the same level. And I find that insulting because if you are doing that, which women are you talking about? Are you talking of women whose agenda is the colonialist feminists? Or are you defending the women who are struggling inside Iran? So you do see, although fortunately it's very rare, but you do see articles, for example, telling you Pezeshkian hasn't named a woman minister. And you think, well, this is an authoritarian religious state. Would it make a difference if a woman was a minister? Do you think she would be struggling against the headscarf? Would she not increase the number of women who attack any poor girl whose fringe is showing in Tehran? What difference does it make? But the agenda, if you like, this whole concept of banal equality, superficial equality, has become so universal that it has influenced people. I'm not saying all of the left has become like that, but it definitely has influenced people in a very bad way. I'm going to finish by a rephrasing of what how Dabashi finishes his article. The pathetic, disgraceful expat Iranian opposition manufactured in the US and Europe have forever failed the test of credibility. I would add that this expat opposition includes, unfortunately, sections of the Iranian left. Thank you. Sorry, just give me a second. I have to do the technical stuff. Okay, let it go. Don't worry. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll start with really just with a question. Well, coming on from the discussion we had with Moshe and looking at element of Gaza solidarity and solidarity at the moment, there are a lot of very uncritical voices in the West towards Hamas. We are all Hamas is emerging in some areas that a confusion of recognizing the Palestinian people's right to armed resistance with explicit or sotto voce support for Hamas is kind of interlaced at the moment. And I'm wondering, in terms of echoes through the Iranian left, it was, I mean, 79 to 81, there was elements of, the mullah's line and, first the mullahs, then us, we will ride in on the back of Islamism, which was a radical response to the dictatorship of the Shah and previously. Do these conversations happen in the Iranian left still in terms of Gaza and I suppose, is it worthwhile us making that explicit link in the West, in the imperialist countries, in terms of how the world is responding to what's happening in Gaza around calls for a single Palestinian state now, the only, could, there's no real democratic force emerging in the Palestinian movement, you know, the PFLP, and it's not strong, and then the other secular forces are really bought off. I was at demonstrations now in Sydney, which are weekly solidarity with Gaza. You actually have leading people on the podium saying that calls to recognise a Palestinian state now, which a lot of groups are calling for, is a distraction, because we want a single state, we don't want two states. So these debates are going on, a sort of a collapse before Islamist political movements. That's it.
Thanks, Yassamine, for a very interesting talk. I want to look at the slightly different, slightly different angle on it, which is the discussion of how it is the case that the Iranian Islamic Republic has survived for now 44 years. And it seems to me, when you refer to Reza Pahlavi needing to escape from being merely seen as the puppet of the West, but also actually the Reza Shah maneuvering with Nazi Germany. Okay. The discussion of Heidegger in this context, it's important to remember that Heidegger was an important ideologist of Nazi Germany. He was not some sort of independent. He'd been academic washed. In the same way, and Carl Schmitt was never accepted denazification and was therefore never academic washed until the most modernists came up with sort of an anti-liberal washing culture. But there's a sense in which you can see the same thing in the national conservatism of the Kaiserreich, which is again this regime. You know, this is a nationalist regime which appeals to German tradition. This is part of its ideological frame. It was created in 1870, lasted 1915. And just some sense of the constitutional liberalism. It's once you've knocked out communists, the choice between constitutional liberalism and nationalist authoritarianism is the politics of the 19th century. It's the politics actually of Spain throughout. Constitutionalist liberalism, which involved dependence on the UK, and nationalist authoritarianism, which sets up Catholicism as the central principle. In Latin America, the same phenomenon all through the 19th century. So it looks to me as though there's a sense in which that's there. There's a sense in which one could say the same thing about Ataturk. Okay, he's a secularist, modernizer, but he's also Turkish, guy who completes the ethnic cleansing of the Armenians, which had begun in 1915, and attempts, largely successfully, actually, ethnically cleanses the Greeks out of Western Turkey. So I'm sort of, in that sense, the question of how to think the alternative to that, it's almost certainly going to be the case that either, well, the usual bloody thing, either the People's Front with the Liberals winds up being, you're just a puppet of the imperialists, On the other hand, the People's Front of the Nationalists winds up being, you're just a left cover, a sort of left cover for the local nationalist regime. And how to think beyond that. And your point about that there's a consciousness which fights against the efforts of the imperialists to cut the country, cut the state up into its national components and have presumably separate Azerbaijan to Iranian Azerbaijan, Iranian Kurdistan, Uzbekistan, what the hell the name of the Arab
Kurdistan.
Kurdistan. The fact that there's a consciousness against that, and which that must be one of the most encouraging features of the situation. Then, for instance, it's possible to build further on that in terms of regional unification policy. That's it.
I'd like to ask a question away. The attitude of the Iranian opposition to the working class, in particular in other Arab countries, Jordan, Egypt, and so on.
Yeah, thanks. I just thought it's worthwhile questioning the concept of an Israel-Iran war. I can believe that Israel would go to war with Iran, see that. But the other way around just strikes me as how. I was talking to Burke in the pub last night, and they're saying wars will make, Iran do that. Anyway, how could it do it? So yeah, Israel could tomorrow, today, attack Iran's nuclear facilities. I don't know whether it's got bunker busters, but it could easily be supplied. It's got the means to deliver them. It could go in with nukes. It's allowed to. Israel could bombard Iran's infrastructure, knock out the electricity supply. Assuming there's dams there, bust the dams, generally do them over. Okay, Iran responds by doing what? Sending a load of drones off and missiles off, most of which get shot down, including last time on Gaza from Saudi Arabia and Jordan, but also with US fighter aircraft knocking out the drones, US, anti-ballistic missile facilities, blah, 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 blah. And in the fantasy of some, then Iran's Air Force takes off. I sort of giggle and say, what, Air Force? Can they actually fly anymore? I mean, it's technology from the 60s, isn't it? Something like that, maybe it's 70s, but it's a joke. And what do? They send their tanks over. No, it's so okay. The only thing they really could do is launch off Hezbollah. But does Hezbollah act according to orders? Is it merely an extension of the Revolutionary Guards? Well, exactly. And again, you just asked, I asked the same question, is Hezbollah going to send its tanks down? So, I mean, you pose the question and you instantly say, well, no, then, I mean, they might act like the Mujahideen. I always remember them. We used to hold their paper in the print shop, we used to print their paper. And if you just look at their tanks, I mean, I can't remember what they were, Sherman something or other, sort of T-34s, or, they're toy soldiers, it's a toy army. So okay, they did go over the border, and I don't know what they expected, but they were massacred. And that's what I would expect with Hezbollah, I mean, if they were stupid enough. Anyway, so I don't think there's going to be an Israel-Iran war of two sides. There can be a war by a punishment in that sense, an extended punishment by Israel of Iran. And it would have to be with the blessing of the United States, simply on the basis of bombs, spare parts. Israel isn't militarily an independent force. Okay, so I can accept that. Okay, in Israel, Lebanon war, or in Israel, I know you might not like this one, but in Israel, Hezbollah. You know, I accept your point about Hamas. But anyway, so I'm just questioning that sort of that item on the agenda, should we put it like that? Okay. I'm also in the position of well, not quite where you are, but I first met Iranian comrades coming out of 79. I knew Iranians because quite a lot of Iranians came to Britain, didn't they, for education purposes all the way up to that. But I remember meeting Iranian exiles, and given that I actually am dyslexic, they chose me for some bizarre reason to edit Radgar in English. I could turn their very flowery prose into slightly more down-to-earth English, smooth things out. And I think I did get someone checking the English, you know, spell it afterwards. But the point I'm making really is, yes, I've known the comrades in that sense, but also I can remember meeting the Sen for the first time, I think, in the National Theatre. I think it was me and David or David. I don't know what I remember, Darwin. But anyway, the point would be that we sit down there and he tells me, well, I'll be returning to Iran very soon because of the revolution. Well, that's what they thought. The revolution will be happening very soon. So you won't be needing to do this job too long, sort of idea. But that was in their heads. And I sort of naively went along with that, of course, you know, okay, if you say so. But obviously I don't now, just like you. You know, 44 years later, you know, looking at all the false springs of, you know, the green movement, which I had no illusions in terms of the actual green movement, it does look like now that what we're dealing with, you have to say, this is a regime that is well rooted. It might not be right to the bottom of society, but in 20% of society, and controlling the state, the apparatus, it's there. And in that sense, the problem is that because the left was so the left was weak, first of all, and then it was comprehensively destroyed, and then it's comprehensively destroyed itself as a force in exile. But you know, you've touched upon it. So in that sense, I can understand who are they called? Prince of Wales, isn't he called now?
King Charles.
Who?
King Charles?
No, the other one, the son.
Oh,
William.
William and Kate, or whoever was
Duke of Sussex.
whoever's doing your life freedom and whatever.
Okay, yeah, they did.
Whoever it is, whoever, you know, the Monaco guy.
Harry and Meghan.
Harry and Meghan, oh well, there you are. You know, all of those types. Because the actual reality is that this isn't code for the communists, as it might have been, right? And which they wouldn't have touched with a barge pole, right? So what this is code for, and this is the problem with the left, this is code for the Shah coming back, or whoever, or I don't know what their candidate is. Surely they wouldn't choose the Mujahideen. But whatever it is, this isn't the left. And the problem with the left is that they automatically go back life freedom, whatever, right? They automatically line up with that in a completely uncritical and completely naive way. And in that sense, they're just lining up with the US establishment, with the EU establishment.
Sorry. Go ahead, sorry.
So that's
Just questions online, so.
that's just a comment on that one. Just two more points really. In terms of the left, this equation of how should I put it? The Iranian regime, for example, with the United States, they put an equal sign there. This equation of Hamas with Israel, I think it's not a widespread thing so much on the left, in Europe and the United States, but it is widespread on what part is with the Iranian left. I just thought it might be worthwhile, also in this discussion, just bringing in our separation from our previous correspondent from the United States, Daniel Lazar. We broke with Daniel Lazar. We've got the correspondence. I don't know whether we're public or not. We'll see about that. But we had an article from the Comrade, basically saying that genocide, the threat of genocide was garbage. He actually said the idea of genocide is garbage. And he put forward the argument of what's the difference between killing one person, for example, and killing a million people. Well, he did, that's what he said.
One's a tragedy, the other's the statistic, wasn't that?
Well, that starts. Yeah, it wasn't true, by the way, but either way. But yeah, because this concept of genocide was invented, I don't know, by a liberal Zionist, a conservative Zionist, and because the original definition, involves, I think, things like culture, and the UN definition involves this or that, he dismissed it as you can't talk about genocide because garbage in, garbage out. That was, and basically we took the position that if we maintain that view, if you publish that view, we're not going to publish it anymore. So we had to have a commitment, and we didn't get that commitment. So we've had a long correspondence. And precisely what he was arguing and wanted to argue is the symmetry between Hamas and Zionism. And sort of the reasons you didn't really explore, Yassamine, right? It is, to me, a pretty basic concept of the violence and even the ideology of the oppressed and the ideology and violence of the oppressors, not least when we're in Britain and the United States. And it's, I'm not saying so much UK bombs, there are tiny, tiny supplies of arms going from Britain to Israel, but crucially the United States, which I've just indicated, is Israel is completely dependent militarily at the present time on the United States, but we do need to take an absolute stand against that. So it is disappointing that some comrades on the left, the exile left, echo that sort of, I call it apologetics, ultimately, for Israel. They're ultimately apologetics for imperialism, as if there are two equal sides.
Yeah, I'll try to explain to some. Thanks. There is also some people who want to talk there, so I'll take that later. Okay. Where were we? I think we have to be very clear that we are not all Hamas and we don't agree with Hamas's position. Hamas was quite disliked before October 2023. There were signs of opposition within Gaza. I know that it has now gained a lot of popularity in the West Bank, but it was, and I'm sure there is still elements of corruption in Hamas. But most importantly, this is an organization that says it supports capital. It's there are a number. I've found lots of statements from various people saying we are not against capital, but more importantly, when they're addressing issues of equality, talk of Homs and Zakat. Homs and Zakat are Homs, I think, is more common in Islam, in Shia and Sunni Islam. But it's basically 1/5 of your income you give to charity or to the state that distributes that charity. Well, given that you don't pay any taxes, that's less than VAT, it's equivalent to VAT in UK. It's not egalitarian by any means. And of course, until October, there was this whole resentment by ordinary Palestinians that the leadership of Gaza, of Hamas, were living in semi-luxurious life. Of course, they have paid a very heavy price since then. Many of them are dead, but it doesn't make them heroes. I find less signs, or I haven't seen enough to tell me that Hamas has actually kind of, if you like, attacked women for not wearing a headscarf and some of the issues that other people have mentioned. And to be honest, it's not, I mean, when you're getting bombed and you're living from one tent to another, I don't think anyone could impose that in the current situation. The criticism of Hamas is one thing. The acceptance of the right of Palestinians to fight by whatever means they can is another, and we have to be 100% on that. And apparently now the UN even agrees that should be the case. But we do have to put Hamas's terrible acts in the category of anti-colonial fighters. I think in the replies to Dan Lazar, we were right to explain that, in India, in Africa, many anti-colonial forces that weren't left-wing did acts of violence that are abhorrent. But at the same time, you look at it within the context of history and the fight against colonialism. When you have settler colonial states such as Israel, then that is acceptable. It doesn't mean you support Hamas. It means you resist to become the liberal apologetic of Israel that says, oh, everything was fantastic if only 7th of October hadn't happened. As many people, including Moshe, including Avi Schleim, repeatedly tell us, is that 7th of October 2023 was the inevitable consequence of 1948. That when you have Nakba, when you have decades of repression, when you have Bantustan, and when you put 2 million people in what was rightly called open-air prison, then people do mad things. And yeah, we don't approve of it. I have never justified or tried to excuse what happened on the 7th of October, but I do see it within a historic context. And I think you are right to point out what we should tell people in demonstrations. And here, there are two problems. One is those sections of the left who I think told us in 2007, after the Iraq War, that kind of time, that you have to, these people become Islamic and then they join the left. Yeah, it's kind of natural progression. So all of Hamas would certainly become SWP or socialist or whatever. And the Iranian left was strong. It wasn't very strong, but it was strong. As John says, it was destroyed by the Islamists. The mosque can mobilize, okay, it is now currently in these days, it is a victim. The mosque can mobilize people and attack the working class. Yeah, and even lumpen proletarians, unemployed and so on, can be mobilized by the same mosque. In Tehran, I went to a demonstration by oil workers. We were going towards Tehran refinery, one of the biggest oil workers. We were surrounded by Hezbollah people who were shouting, Hezbollah, Hezbollah, only one party, party of God. And they were all carrying chains, metal chains. So when people in London tell me we are all Hezbollah, I say, yeah, that was great, wasn't it? We had a great time going to that workers' demonstration. And I was completely scared for my life because these people were serious, they weren't joking. And some of them might have been from the poorer sections of society, but the mosque had organized them. In between 1980 and the end of 81, the overwhelming majority of organizations, such as Fedayeen Minority, who opposed the government, were either dead or in exile or in Kurdistan. So there was no other place. That was the option. And this wasn't, so the story of 1979 is quite distorted. So sections of the left wrote at the time, the Iranian left were Stalinist. If only they had not supported Khomeini, they could have taken power. The days of the revolution were dual power. They could have taken power. Nothing can be further from the truth. The Iranian left at the time was coming out of prison. Some of them were shocked there were such big demonstrations. Some of them were shocked that their organizations were more popular than they had ever imagined. Yes, the left had some strengths. The 1st of May, 1979, I think 500,000 people gathered for the anti-government May Day protests that Fedayeen Minority organized, right? 500,000 is a lot. Tehran wasn't as big as it is now. But it fizzled out in less than 2 years, all of that. One, because they didn't know where they were going. Some of them were saying, we'll go back to armed struggle against whom, with what, and so on. Some weren't sure. They were determined to oppose those factions of Fedayeen who were supporting the government. That was clear. But beyond that, they didn't know what they were doing. So confusion of the Iranian left was also part of it. But this idea is that there's a metamorphosis. People are on the streets, they become Islamists, they become Hamas, and then they become radical left-wingers. It's just not true. Don't believe it. It doesn't happen. And I think Iran's example is a good one to tell these people. Now, it is funny because these organizations have changed their position on Iran time and time again. So if you look at Britain, first of all, they were all supporting Khomeini. The Trotskyist organizations were supporting. It wasn't just the Communist Party. The Force International was supporting Khomeini. Then they said, it's a reactionary government. Then after the Iran-Iraq war, after the invasion of Iraq, they were supporting Iran. No war on Iran. They threw us out of Stop the War because we were saying we want to criticize the Islamic Republic. Then during the Syrian civil war, they fell out with Iran. And I'm reliably informed that nowadays, at least in their private conversation, they say, we support Hezbollah, but Iran is terrible. And you say, excuse me, where does this logic come from? So there you are. You know, it's confusion, lack of understanding, not following facts, being buried under your own propaganda. You've created a propaganda, you close your eyes to the rest of the world, and then repeat that propaganda. On IRI's Islamic Republic survival, I would add one other thing. I think your theme of constitutional liberalism, Mike, is fits correctly. But I would argue that contrary to what the US and its allies think, sanctions and the threat of war have also propped up the regime, because sanctions always strengthen those in power. Everyone knows that sanction just consolidates those who already have the power. It has also increased the gap between the rich and the poor and everything else, because they can monetize sanction. But the threat of war as well, given that sense of nationalism, given that sense of we want to keep Iran at all costs, the threat of war is so strong that when there is a real threat of war, some of these even royalists say, oh, well, maybe we would have to go and fight. You see, so that threat of war is something that props up the Islamic Republic. And so the Iranian left has done both People's Front mistakes, as you know. Today, a majority were in the People's Front of the Islamic Republic. The only excuse one can find for them is that Moscow had told them this was the way to do it, and they didn't use their own brains. Now, sections of the left are in the People's Front of Liberalism, right? There is, let's unite against dictatorship, authoritarianism, and it doesn't matter who they are. And so you really have to argue against this whole concept of people frontism, uniting with no principles, uniting at all costs. The enemy is big, so we must forget our differences and so on, which is prominent amongst the right-wing opposition to the regime, but the left is repeating it as well. I think the Iranian left opposition had great sympathy and worked closely with protest movements in the region for decades, but not in recent times. And that's obvious for obvious reasons. There's repression in those countries, but also other issues that have affected the left. So both the PFLP and the PDFLP have had and still have Iranian recruits. So people actually go there and fight with these organizations. I know they're not the working class. Connecting with the working class in Egypt is not an easy task, because you need to be able to speak the language apart from anything else. And Iran and none of the Arab countries have the same language. So I think there is attempts at maybe solidarity with working class in various Arab countries, but I can't say there is anything tangible, anything that you can talk about. In terms of the arms, you're absolutely right. Israel wants this war, and that's the difference. That's why it's stupid to say Iran and Israel want war, right? Iran has shied away from war since at least October 2023. It's doing its best to have secret talks with the US. Unless it does that, it's committing mass suicide. It's committing suicide. No one in the wildest thought can think that Iran can survive an Israeli attack. Never mind an Israeli attack supported by US. And Iran and the Iranian leaders are many things, but let me tell you, ex-comrades of the left, Iranian leaders are not stupid. They are not going to kill themselves. They're not going to destroy their own government because of some notion about, they're very pragmatic. They supported Armenia against Azerbaijan. They are that pragmatic. When their interest dictates it, Never mind, is Azerbaijan is Islamic. We are fighting with Armenia. This kind of leadership is not going to commit suicide, so forget about it. The planes, they do have other planes, but they're all almost dead. So they, apart from F-14s, apparently they have Sukhoi, Russian 24s, MiGs, and some F-14s. But remember that all of these plane incidents are a regular event in Iran. And this is partly because they don't have spare parts because of sanctions. So passenger planes can't get spare parts, never mind warplanes. So Iran's war arsenal is just dead. And the tanks are a joke. But also, you can't go all the way, across 3 other countries to get there. And as you know, for all the reputation, all the stories you read in the right-wing press about wonderful drones that Iran has sold to Russia, Iranian drones did appear to be completely ineffective in attacking Israel. So we are back to square one. On Hezbollah, again, I don't think Iran would ask, because they're trying to de-escalate. As they keep saying, they're in the mission to de-escalate. So what would they ask Hezbollah? But even if they did ask Hezbollah, would Hezbollah jeopardize its own position in the Lebanese government and go and fight with them? I don't think so. Yeah, I think we really have to say that equating Hamas and Israel, equating Iran and Israel, as much as we oppose, and we should oppose Hamas, as much as we should call and continue to call for the overthrow of the Islamic Republic, equating them with Israel is exactly what is the opposite of what Davashi is writing. The region has changed. You can't just put the duvet cover on your head and pretend nothing has changed. Because it has changed, you have to look at realities. And those realities tell you that the genocide pursued by Israel is on a scale rarely seen in modern times. And in facing that, you don't support Hamas, you don't support Hezbollah, but you don't support Israel, or you don't become apologetic for Israel. Israel has enough apologetics around it. The entire European Union, the United States, in both Democrats and Republicans, and the United Kingdom are apologetic, are supporters, sympathizers of Israel. You go and do something else. And you wanted to speak. I'll try and give you, I have promoted you.
Yeah. Yes, Yasmina, I'm
Hold
on there.
I need to raise the voice here. Sorry. Try again.
Okay, can you hear me?
Not really.
Okay. Will I shout?
I think you might be better off writing text, and we can't hear you well.
Okay, okay. I've just put my questions in the discussion in the chat there.
John was looking for a word, she came to here. But there was correspondence in Kosovo between the Tsar and American comrades. One of them said that his position was abstentionist.
Sorry, on what was it abstentionist in terms of the Israel war?
Yeah,
God, I don't know what.
yeah, he was saying that the Tsar's position was abstentionist, of course. What is it? Doesn't matter, I suppose. But
Anne has asked two questions, which I will try and read. So it's not easy doing those passes in one person, but I'll try. So the first question is, in the past, Raha Karga described the regime as incapable of change. How much do you think this view has been challenged? I know you've said it has been able to survive, but what are its methods of adaptation? And also the woman's question is, in Israel is not discussed, although the religious regime needs very repressive measures against them. What do you say on this? I've read the questions, but next time write the questions to everyone, otherwise we can see it, but they can't. Okay. I think in terms of change, I would say the Islamic Republic has changed in that it has adapted, right? You can't make the Islamic Republic become a progressive regime. You can't make it a liberal regime. But it knows its own limits, and it negotiates those limits depending on the level of the protest. So despite all this talk about the women should wear headscarves, there are laws, as I said, on Sundays, they have cameras that can find your face and recognize you. I mean, this must be quite a big database that can recognize you and give you a penalty if your headscarf has fallen off your head. Shames they didn't manage to find the drones that was going towards Hania's place, but there you are. Apparently they can do this. The technology is there. But they judge which area of Tehran they have to be severe and which areas they don't need to be severe. In the north of Tehran, there are videos. Look up some of the malls of North Tehran are advertising their shops and stuff. And you can go to YouTube and have a look at these. And you will see women are not just not wearing any headscarves, they are wearing clothes that would be considered reasonably revealing in London on a warm day, never mind Tehran. And as you go towards the south of the city, the poorer areas, that restriction gets worse and worse. And in a way, one of the reasons why we shouldn't dismiss or undermine the woman life freedom movement is that the repression of the headscarf is more felt in neighborhoods where both the religious groups are stronger, but also ordinary people in those areas are more Muslim and therefore might not defend a young girl who's showing her hair or something. So, but the regime is clever at adapting with the region, with the area. So with all these talks of national minorities, the right of nations, and so on, Pezeshkian appeared on the election platforms saying he was a Turk, an Azeri, and a Kurd, right? So that's adapting to the discourse in the country. The discourse in the country is, oh, the Mahsa Amini was Kurd, she was attacked because she was Kurd. Here he is coming and saying, my mother was Kurdish, and so on. These are all, they are meaningless in terms of real, if you like, improvements for ordinary people, but there are clever ways of changing the dynamics of the protests, giving something, taking away something else. And the same is true of economic issues. So wherever they face major protests, because the IMF has told them to remove subsidies, but when they remove subsidies, if they see there is too much protest, they find a way of doing it in another way, because they don't want to hurt the IMF either. So what they do is they'll say, okay, we'll give you coupons that will cover. We won't call it subsidies, but we will give you coupons. So this is all adapting. Now, it is true that, yes, once you become political, once you raise a political or an proletarian demand, this regime will come on you like a ton of bricks and kill you. But that's different from adapting to what is in their power in order to fool the population. I forgot something on the regional issue, and I think this is a good time to talk about that as well. I mean, to be fair, the left in 79 had many mistakes, but its respect for Iran's national minorities and the slogan, self-determination for national minorities, was quite solid. They didn't shy away from that slogan. And that's why they supported the Kurds and the Turkomans, notably, two areas where civil wars took place between the government and the local population. And in that way, that's why when they were forced to move to Kurdistan, they were very popular in Kurdistan, unlike the Mujahideen, who hadn't supported national minorities. You went to any village in Kurdistan, you said you were with the Fedayeen, they gave you so much food, you had to take some of it away with you. They were really, the Iranian, the Fars, the Persian left was popular in villages. And they produced, for example, the paper of the organization in Farsi Kar was reproduced in Kurdish with local news, but also national, the general propaganda and so on. I think what occurred was at times moving away from this for practical reasons. For example, the war meant that eventually the left had to leave Kurdistan, and that has had an effect in this distance between the Persian left and the Kurdish movement. And the Kurdish movement, which was at that time paid for by Saddam, moved very quickly and quite considerably to the right as things developed. I mean, you don't have to go very far. The KDP in Iraq was pro-war, pro-Bush, and we now have the Kurdish Authority, which is a source of embarrassment, I should think so, to all Kurds. PUK was no better. Iran went through that same situation. We have a Kurdish leader who used to be apparently a Marxist. I won't name him, but apparently he was a Marxist. Well, I remember when he said he was a Marxist. And during Trump's time, he went to Washington as a guest of the White House because he'd now become such supporter of regime change from above that Pompeo met him in the White House as the representative of the Iranian Kurdish nation. That's when obviously Trump thought regime change was on the cards. So the regional issue is something the left can win and should pay more attention, but this distance, this disparity between the two has been, in my opinion, damaging, maybe not. On the question of Israel and women. Well, anyone who has visited Israel, or maybe I haven't, but I've heard from people who've gone there, and anyone who has visited Finchley, not very far from here. There are women who are wearing headscarves, who are doing a lot of work. And yes, it is true that there are sections of, I assume, more Orthodox Jewish population who are not beacons of women's liberation. This didn't stop Netanyahu from becoming a figurehead on the freedom, life, women movement. He was talking about it all the time. He was sending tweets in Farsi. I assume he wrote them in Hebrew and someone was showing solidarity. But yes, that's definitely okay, we have seen the comments. That's it.
I just wanted to come in just with a snippet. That is, when we produced our first journal, the Leninist #1, I can remember putting in the founding statement, the butcher Khamenei, which nowadays, given the description you've had, you gave, Yasmin, of the massacre in every imprisonment, just killing of left-wingers. It's shrug shoulders and statements of, it's like looking at Hitler in World War II and killing Jews and communists. But at the time, just worthwhile making the point that was highly controversial. And, you mentioned the official communists. At that time, the Morning Star was pushing constantly the Imam's line. And this is obviously with the encouragement of the Soviet Union. But it wasn't alone. I mean, it wasn't all Trotskyists, it has to be said, because there were some that did take a principled position. But in general, the left basically looked at Khomeini and the overthrow of the Shah and the coming to power of the new theocracy as some sort of progressive blow to imperialism. And the tragedy was, this is me now looking at things from the outside, and I just wondered if you could tell us what it was like there, that you had people like Tudeh, that means mass in Farsi, the People's Party, which is the official Communist Party, but also this organization, the Mujahideen, bizarrely called the Majority. My understanding is that the majority was from the Central Committee as opposed to the membership. It's quite a misleading designation. Anyway, the majority and Tudeh were actually supporting the oppression of the left inside Iran, as well as on the streets of London and in the meetings of the official Communist Party.
There were two Trotskyist groups from the official World International, one of which was based on the big students in London and Paris. and the other, which was based on the students in the United States. The two the international factions had dissolved themselves, so the two groups were forcibly unified in 79. They were forcibly unified on the basis of the line of the American Socialist Workers' Party, which was also pathology marxist. And I remember in a central committee meeting, it was still called the ING, it was about the Socialist League at that time. Brian Grogan coming back from Tehran and celebrating what a wonderful feeling it was, shouting, "Allah Akbar," along with the mass. It's just, but the other side of that coin, and this is back to the Lazar point, the line of the international Spartacist tendency was that the Khomeini movement was purely reactionary. That's at one level, this is true, but another level, actually, the fact that the regime has survived for 40 years is an illustration of its faults. That this reactionary anti-capitalism is a form of nationalism. Yes, it's reactionary, but it's the contradiction that you express, Yassamine, that on the one hand, the fact, and on the other hand, more than 50% of undergraduates will get it. And on the one hand, the vote, and on the other hand, very substantial higher education sector with very substantial technical development. And yes, these drones may be useless by in comparison with being able to be shot down in large numbers by Western high tech, but they're clearly not useless of the Ukrainian front lines. This is, so that sense, and this relates back to the Lazar, because the Spartacist League of the United States, James Robertson was a pupil of, or rather an imitator of James B. Cannon. And Cannon was, in his early history and in his later politics as well, an American nativist. He was opposed to the influence of Germans and Jews in the CPUSA in the 1920s. And wanted to build a party based on Midwestern American native working class, not a party, a migrant party. And that American nativism is reflected in Robertson's ideas. There's a very infamous speech of Robertson's where a man's drunk, and he's talking about the greasy Italians and the dumb Russians and all this sort of high-level national chauvinism stuff. And part of that high-level national chauvinism stuff is the theory of interpenetrating populations, which meant that it was unprincipled to prioritize support for Palestinians over there is no solution to the Palestine question without the consent of the Israeli working class. But Robertson defended that line because he was an American chauvinist. We know that Robertson was an American chauvinist. We've got documentation of it, and the problem with the Alliance for Workers' Liberty defend a not dissimilar line, but they do so because they're Atlanticists and similarly support dropping bombs on Libya, dropping bombs on Syria. They were prepared to support both when the British government talked about dropping bombs on Syria in support of the government, and then subsequently dropping bombs on Syria in support of the opposition. What they wanted to do was to show British muscularity by dropping bombs on Syria in support of some Alliance for Workers' Liberty defended that. So the AWL, because they're Atlanticists, Lazar's fetishism of an imaginary equivalence between Israel and Hamas. It's about the descendants from the Spartacist line on the Israel-Palestine. Okay, this we discussed this. We discussed this within private language, but at the end of the day, he can't, because he was writing with years from writing, but at the end of the day, he can't relate from.
Just an aside on your aside on Netanyahu being the eat, pray, love, or whatever it's called. Of course, Orthodox Jewish women who often wear wigs and scarves, but this is not state enforced as it is in Iran and Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. And I think, while yes, we could say Netanyahu was a complete hypocrite, and this is just more of the human rights tool of imperialism. But I think for a century, the left has handed our enemies the weapon of democracy, and they continue to bash idiots on the left who side with reactionaries. And until the left is able to have emerge as clearly the main voice for democracy and liberation and freedom, our opponents will continue to bash us with the human rights stick, the women's rights stick. So.
I am going to speak a little bit about the Imam's line, because it was significant, it was important. And it was a phrase that the left created. I mean, Imam wanted everyone to support his line, but this was the left as well. So I suppose in the context of the Cold War, Moscow then suddenly woke up on the 13th of February, 1979, and Iran was no longer the island of stability, the gendarme of the region after Israel. It was always the second gendarme of the US, but they'd lost a big ally. And it was a big shock. So, and I can understand in Moscow, they must have been jubilant about it. What happened with the Iranian left took a while. So we could see that Radio Moscow, which many people listen to, which broadcast in Persian to the population, was praising Imam Khomeini, and most of us on the left were already facing arrests and so on. But no one was openly supporting Khomeini. And I think a line came. It must have been a kind of a line from Moscow. This is it. You are now going to do that. And the two that went on that line, it was inevitable. Amongst the Fedayeen in prison, there had been lots of debates about the nature of the Soviet Union. Remember, the Fedayeen started with kind of early Maoist ideas. What I mean by early is, Khrushchev has betrayed revisionism, has taken over, but they weren't pro-China either, right? And in this context, some people, maybe actually rightly, criticized this line. But in criticizing this line, they became more and more apologetic for aspects of the Soviet Union. So the groundwork was there, that it didn't come out of nowhere. And as Tudeh became the party, the official party, these people took the same line. They weren't in a single party, but they were very close. They became an alliance in practical terms. Now, it's very interesting, and the majority of the membership, you could tell, you're getting arrested on the street. You're a woman for decades. Your mother hasn't worn a headscarf, no mind you, and suddenly the state is saying you have to wear a headscarf. They were up in arms. So the opposition to the new regime was very genuine and widespread. In these circumstances, the majority of the Central Committee, who had been, if like, the leadership in the prison as well, took this position. The minority of the Central Committee dissented and left. Now, only recently, the man who led this majority faction, in a meeting that I was present in Oxford, said it was the fault of minorities. They should have stayed, because only a year after this, the majority of the Central Committee and the majority of the members would have been with them. I think they can't. There are splits that are because you don't like someone. There are splits because you've got minor differences. If one of you thinks a government is reactionary and the other one is saying you have to support it because it's Imam's line, it's a bit difficult to be in the same organization. And so I don't buy this idea that if only it was the fault of minorities, they split too early. If they stayed, everyone would have taken their position. But the way minority did this is probably not very organized as well. They didn't know what they wanted and so on. So I won't go into detail. Imam's line was very clear. So Imam said the Kurdish people who are calling for regional autonomy are the enemy of the Islamic Revolution. He never used the word Iran, the Islamic Revolution. We will wage jihad against the whole Kurdish population. Right? So if you have someone saying that to you, you can't have some of the organizations supporting the Kurds, some of them opposing the Kurds. Imam's line was, workers have to be patient. There were a lot of strikes. As you know, February 79, most of the country was on strikes. Oil workers, employees in banks, everybody. Khomeini said, if you continue to strike, you are opposing the Islamic Revolution and you will be punished. And that was it, you had to make it. So Imam's line covered every aspect of everyone's life. And in my opinion, and Fedayeen majority were on the wrong side of it. Now, Tudeh has changed, and Tudeh is nowadays fully fledged anti-Islamic republic. And Fedayeen majority has many factions, I think, rather than, you could say there are many factions of Fedayeen majority, but as a general concept, they are soft on reformists. So that's the continuation of Imam's line, if you like. There are powerful arguments that were used against us for not supporting the government. And one of them is the ones that I've heard from Spike, for example, during Brexit. You are not in touch with the working class. You only meet students and leftist supporters. The working class is with Imam, and we are with Imam, so we are with the working class. But you could say, well, the working class voted for Hitler, so we are with Hitler, because the working class is at the moment deluded and made a mistake. I don't buy that. Yeah, in terms of this whole concept of they are equal and what about the Israeli working class and so on. I mean, those who are familiar with the support for the Irish movement in this country know, and very often it's the same people. So the Socialist Party, what is now SPU, had always, in Scotland, I remember, they were always talking about, but we have to support the unionist workers as well. And of course, you can see that elements of that is still in the Israel argument when they put it forward. AWL, as Mike said, was prominent. I mean, every argument I've had with the AWL, because they are the single largest proposer of the two-state solution in the Palestine demonstration. That is the positions they take. I think the one other thing I would say is that the Soviet Union was actually quite opportunistic in its approach to Iran, because during the Shah, there were times when they were saying, the Shah is following the non-capitalist road to development. Yeah. And you're saying, why? And this was the excuse for this was that amongst hundreds of major deals, arms deals, industrial deals with the West and US, Iran had bought, I don't know, a small section of a steel plant from Czechoslovakia or somewhere. And that proved that Iran was on the non-capitalist road to development. But once Khomeini came to power, of course, that was it. He was the hero of the non-capitalist road to development. And the war, the Iran-Iraq war, played a significant role there, because almost less than a year into the, a year and a half into the revolution, then once you have a major war, which eventually killed more than 500,000, and the war that was a war, not like these wars, was tanks and soldiers and face-to-face and horrible. Many people have compared it to aspects of the First World War. Once you had something like that, it really, the agenda changed. So it was no longer just the Imam's line, it was other things. And of course, the left were then told, you are spies, your enemies, so killing you is justice. That's it. Finished.
We're back at 2 o'clock.
I don't know what happened to this computer. All I can do is power to end.